All right. Thanks everyone for coming. We're gonna get going. Move into the camera view here. Hello online. And for those of you that are here, there are some books for sale at the end of the thing. You can hang out, we can talk. I had seen Dr. Segal online a couple times, some interviews, but never actually read any of his papers. And so I spent the last week or so reading a couple of papers. And there's some terms that came to my mind that we've all heard over the last 2 years. And so I'm just going to read them before I introduce them. Preparing to settle Gaza, total siege, second Nakba, or the Gaza Nakba, human animals, an empire of evil, Gaza as a city of evil, people of light versus the people of darkness, and wasps' nests. And these are all things said by Israelis over the last couple of years, and there's more, but that was just a quick. So thanks so much for being here. It's a privilege to welcome you to today's speaker. We're gathered here to engage with one of the most critical and challenging fields of historical inquiry, the study of genocide and holocausts. In an age where the lessons of the past feel increasingly urgent, our understanding must be both deep and urgent. After all, we've all spent the past 2 years watching the first ever live stream genocide. We're exceptionally fortunate to be joined by a scholar whose work is defined by his intellectual rigor, his moral clarity, and his commitment to confronting the complexities of history. Professor Raz Segal is an internationally recognized authority in Holocaust and genocide studies. Dr. Segal is Associate Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies and Endowed Professor in the Study of Modern Genocide at Stockton University, where he also directs the Master of Arts in Holocaust and Genocide Studies program. Dr. Segal has held a Harry Frank Guggenheim Fellowship, a Fulbright Fellowship, and was recently a Senior Fellow at the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust Studies 2023, and a recipient of the Velge Award 2024 from the Free University in Brussels. Today, he'll share his insights on Israel's genocide in Gaza, settler colonialism, Holocaust weaponization, and international law. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Raz Segal.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming, and thanks for those joining online. Is this fine? I'm speaking loud enough? Good? Everyone can hear me?
You're good online as well.
All right, so I'll jump right in. I'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then looking forward to discussions, questions. So Palestinian poet Khiba Abu Nada wrote on 9th of October 2023 that Israel's attack this time follows, quote, no pattern. Everything is being bombed. Gaza from the north to the south being bombed in a chaotic, catastrophic manner, mass butchery, senseless assassination of everything. Three days later, a journalist and translator, wrote in a WhatsApp message, where is the West? Where are these human rights they preach? Where is international law? This is genocide, he continued, and it should be immediately stopped. How have we here in the West failed so miserably to listen to people facing such extreme violence in an era that we dare to call the era of the witness? And how have we failed so miserably in stopping this genocide in Gaza and more broadly in Palestine? And how do we continue to fail? The day after the Jewish holiday of Purim in March 2023, Jewish settlers stormed Huwara, a Palestinian town in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, and began dancing in celebration of the holiday. Israeli soldiers first joined them, but soon stood by as the settlers, armed with rocks, axes, and pepper spray, set upon a Palestinian family in a parked car. Footage from a security camera shows the settlers attacking the car and the family from all sides. The father, Omar, eventually managed to start the car, pull back, and speed away, but their ordeal continued. Other settlers pursued them with a car and fired on them with guns. The grandfather suffered serious injuries to his head, and his 2-year-old granddaughter, with her eyes burning from the pepper spray, could not open them in the hospital In pain, in shock, in trauma, she could only scream. The attack came just a week after settlers descended on Hawara in the area of Nablus in a carnage of violence reported as a pogrom, a term used historically to describe violence against Jews, including during and immediately after the Holocaust. The attack so resembled horrific images of pogrom violence, especially the burning of parts of the town, that the term appeared even in the mainstream Israeli press. Since then, such scenes of destruction have occurred on a regular basis as an integral part of the increasingly intensifying effort to forcibly remove Palestinians from as much of the West Bank as possible. In the Jordan Valley, for instance, the Israeli army, together with extremely violent Jewish settler groups, is moving forward with lightning speed in the expulsion of thousands of Palestinians and the destruction of dozens of communities. The Jordan Valley comprises about a third of the occupied West Bank and is considered its breadbasket. Omar? But not only there, and not only in the Nablus area. Last June, dozens of mass settlers arrived in Dar Abu Fazza in the area of Ramallah and attacked the 15 families who lived there, around 100 people, setting fires to cars and homes and spraying a Star of David in black and red on one of them. A common practice by Israeli soldiers now on the walls of houses that still remain in the midst of the near total destruction of around 90% of physical structures in Israel's genocide in Gaza. What future awaits forcibly displaced Palestinians in ever-shrinking areas in the occupied West Bank, deprived of their lands and sources of livelihood, exposed to increasingly more wild attacks by Jewish settlers and under the daily oppression of the Israeli genocide state? And what future awaits 2 million forcibly displaced Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, even if the guns will remain silent long enough now for the survivors' bodies to heal a bit, for them to eat a bit, to find some clean water? But then, what of the countless children with amputated limbs, with no parents who survived, with no family members at all in some cases who survived? What of the deep wounds in the minds, hearts, and souls of Palestinians in Gaza upon whom Israel's attack has, to quote from the UN Genocide Convention, inflicted severe bodily and mental harm? Prevention. The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Prevention, which again has failed miserably. And punishment, maybe after 20 or 30 years, when the tons of rubble in Gaza mixed with unexploded US-made Israeli-dropped bombs is somehow removed, maybe then somehow we'll stumble upon the international legal system in ruins, together with all the other quote-unquote lessons of that other genocide, the Nazi destruction of Jews and Jewish communities, which we were told would usher in a period of never again, a post-war, post-Holocaust period, only in reality to give rise to again and again. Indeed, while A in Gaza was pleading with us, asking, where is the West? The West, of course, was busy working exactly in the opposite direction, ensuring that the genocide can continue to unfold by providing Israel with arms and diplomatic cover. The overwhelming support, specifically of the US, effectively renders Israel's assault on Gaza a joint US-Israel genocide. Other states, including Canada, also helped Israel carry out its genocide in various ways, from supplying arms to silencing the struggle to stop the genocide, to denying the severity of the violence and to hampering efforts towards accountability. And now we face a discourse about, quote, the end of the war, so as to blur the fact that Israel's attack on Gaza is a war only insofar as it is a genocidal war. Depicting genocide as a war is an old mechanism of genocide denial. The classic case is the Armenian genocide during World War I, and its denial by the Ottoman Empire as it was perpetrating it, by presenting Armenians as collaborators with the Russian enemy, which necessitated their evacuation from Anatolia, their ancestral homeland, away from the Caucasus front towards the desert area in Iraq and Syria. Deporting millions of civilians to a desert was itself a measure aimed at destruction, but the mass deportations quickly turned into death marches, with Ottoman units and guards, in some cases together with Kurdish perpetrators, massacring Armenians on the way. Altogether, Ottoman authorities oversaw the mass murder of around 1.5 million Armenians and the complete destruction of Armenian society and culture in the Ottoman Empire. Israel has also used evacuation, quote unquote, as a cover for genocide. International humanitarian law prohibits forced displacement unless the security of the civilians involved or imperative military response require it. Israel claimed this exception in its, quote, evacuation orders in Gaza since the first evacuation order on October 13th, 2023, when it ordered more than 1 million Palestinians to leave immediately within 24 hours all areas north of Wadi Gaza for the south. In fact, that order already reflected a flagrant disregard of international humanitarian law, as various categories of civilians, including people with disabilities, with small children, the elderly, and people hospitalized with serious medical problems, cannot be expected to evacuate on a moment's notice. The evacuation was also accompanied by carpet bombings that Israel used to cause, quote, maximum damage, as Israeli army spokesperson at the time, Daniel Hagari, openly admitted. International humanitarian law explicitly forbids such indiscriminate attacks and recognizes their role in forcible displacement. Omar? A, who called Israel's attack genocide on 12th of October, described the terror of that forced displacement in Gaza in a voice message to a friend on October 15th. And this is what he said. I am still at my home in Gaza City. Many people fled to the south, but many stayed here in the north after they saw the massacre of 70 people and more than 200 injured on the road south. And then after that, there was so much bombing in the south, massacres. People left Gaza City, went to the south, and sought shelter with people there, and then they all got shelled. You even have people who fled to the south and came back to Gaza City. By October 13th, Israel had already dropped around 6,000 bombs on Gaza, including phosphorus bombs. Many testimonies and investigations have confirmed, moreover, that Israel dropped in October 2023 its most destructive US-made 2,000-pound bombs precisely on routes and areas that it had itself designated as safe. This forced displacement also unfolded in conditions of the, quote, total siege that Israel's defense minister at the time, Yoav Gallant, had imposed on the entire Gaza Strip on 9th of October. That was following 16 years of Israeli siege on the Gaza Strip before October 2023, which is the longest siege in modern history. Palestinians thus experienced severe shortages of food, clean water, medical supplies, and fuel within days. In A's message on 15th of October, he also reported that, quote, there's no water at all. It's a huge problem. It's catastrophic. Indeed, Gallant's choice of word, total siege, reflects a complete disregard of the difference between civilians and combatants, an indication of genocidal intent to create catastrophe. Israel's president, Yitzhak Herzog, confirmed this disregard and genocidal intent when he said in a press conference, also on 13th of October, that's, quote, it's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. In other words, Israel used the October 13th evacuation order, the first of many to come, not to protect civilians as required by international humanitarian law, but as a mechanism of forced displacement aimed at enhancing their targeting, or in the language of the UN Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The 2 years of Israel's genocide in Gaza since October 2023 have resulted in physical destruction indeed, on a massive scale. Official UN figures report that Israel has killed so far nearly 70,000 Palestinians, including nearly 20,000 children, and injured nearly 170,000 Palestinians, many of them maimed. These are without a doubt minimal numbers. It is likely that at least 15,000 Palestinians remain buried under the rubble, and Alex de Waal, a world-renowned expert on famines, has recently warned that tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza have so far died due to hunger and disease, a result of the dire conditions that Israel has created intentionally in Gaza through their obliteration of around 90% of all structures, including most of the hospitals, the destruction of most of the water and sanitation infrastructure and much of the agricultural land, and the murder of over 1,700 healthcare workers and hundreds of aid workers. Israeli leaders have openly declared their goal of forcibly displacing all Palestinians from the Gaza Strip from the first days of their attack in October 2023. A document by the Israeli Intelligence Ministry on October 13th, coinciding with Israel's first evacuation order, outlined the forced removal of all Palestinians from Gaza to the Sinai Desert in Egypt. Again, we should remember what it means when a state seeks to deport millions of people to a desert. Then, Israeli cabinet member and minister Avi Dichter, in an Israeli radio interview on November 11th, 2023, described Israel's attack as, quote, the Gaza Nakba, referencing the forced displacement of approximately 750,000 Palestinians, the mass murder of over 15,000, and the destruction of hundreds of Palestinians' towns and villages in 1948. Israeli leaders have continued to imagine their attack on Gaza as an iteration of the ongoing Nakba to this day. Omar? Israel's former military intelligence chief, Aaron Khalifa, commented in summer 2025 that the fact that there are already 50,000 dead in Gaza is necessary and required for future generations. It doesn't matter now if they are children, they need a Nakba every now and then to feel the price. Khalifa's chilling reference to the murder of Palestinian children is itself indicative of genocidal intent. Several other Israeli leaders have similarly expressed genocidal intent and in even more explicit terms. On 24th of July 2025, Israeli Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu said in an interview on the radio station Kol Barama that, quote, all Gaza will be Jewish. The government is pushing to wipe out Gaza. Thank God we are wiping out this evil. We are wiping out a population that has been educated on Mein Kampf. This was, of course, a reference to Hitler. The portrayal of all Palestinians in Gaza as Nazis reproduces the genocidal idea that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, which Israel's President Yitzhak Herzog articulated on October 13th, 2023. It's an entire nation out there. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reinforced this image when in late October and early November, he referred a few times to the biblical story of Amalek in conjunction with the beginning of the Israeli ground invasion into the Gaza Strip. This is a story of the Israelites destroying completely a people perceived in its entirety as an enemy, as the ultimate evil. Now, significantly, Israeli soldiers and officers have uploaded hundreds of videos of themselves in Gaza, demonstrated that they understand and are following the genocidal expressions of Israeli political and military leaders. That no Palestinian in Gaza is innocent has become a common refrain from Israeli soldiers who have repeated it on camera again and again and again. Just one example, one Yehuda Lopez, for instance, spoke on TVE channel in February 2024 about his experiences as an Israeli soldier in Gaza, stressing, quote, there are no innocents in Gaza. We have to get that into our heads. He said further that he hopes for an Israeli victory, after which, quote, no one remains there in Gaza. Captain Chai Chemo, deputy commander of a company, to take another example, posted a video of himself on January 30th, 2024, explaining his understanding of the story of Amalek. And this is what he said. With the help of God, we have destroyed a vast area of Gaza and killed tens of thousands of Amaleks. But we are not yet a moral army. This is the real war of the people of Israel. Moral, he said, is to understand that every Arab is suspect. Maybe he is good, maybe he is a bomb, but he is a suspect. Moral is to execute all the terrorists after interrogating them. Moral is to conquer and settle all of the land of Israel. And every place we will leave a wasp's nest, they will retaliate against us sooner or later. Chemo thus views the Amalek story as the basis of a moral framework that casts all Palestinians, every Arab, as enemies, as killable. This is furthermore articulated with an explicit call to occupy and settle, and Chemo concludes with outright dehumanization, warning that Israel should not leave any, quote, wasp's nest. Such dehumanization mirrors former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's description on October 9th, 2023, when he imposed a total siege, describing Palestinians in Gaza as human animals, which coordinator of government activities in the occupied territories, Major General Hassan Aliyan, repeated the following day. This is war only insofar as it is the kind of genocidal warfare that colonial powers and settlers have conducted against indigenous people around the world for centuries. Especially when indigenous people rebelled against oppression, destruction, mass violence, and the complete disregard for life and for the environment, colonial authorities and settlers responded with wars of annihilation against people who they perceived as human animals, as barbarians, not deserving protection or consideration of law. Indeed, international law emerged to regulate wars between, quote, civilized nations, never to apply to colonial warfare. This is how German General Lotto von Trotha imagined the world when he issued, quote, an extermination order in response to the violent uprising of the Herero people against German colonial occupation in Southwest Africa in 1904. That order signaled the beginning of the German genocide of the Herero and Nama people. This is how Israeli President Herzog imagined the world when he responded in an interview on MSNBC on 5th of December 2023 to a question about the large-scale killing of Palestinians in Gaza by saying, and I quote Herzog here, "This war is a war that is not only between Israel and Hamas." I'll say this again Herzog's words, "This war is a war that is not only between Israel and Hamas. It's a war that is intended really truly to save Western civilization. We are attacked by a jihadist network, an empire of evil, and this empire wants to conquer the entire Middle East, and if it weren't for us, Europe, we'd be next, and the United States follows." Herzog thus expressed the white supremacist rationalization of destruction of people under colonial occupation, but here taken to extreme, couched within a discourse of religious war that points to a Jewish supremacy as a manifestation of white supremacy at the heart of Israeli settler colonialism. This is the reason we have heard and read dozens and dozens of expressions of, quote, intent to destroy, again, to quote for the UN Genocide Convention, intent to destroy Palestinians by Israeli political and military leaders in the last 2 years, because they imagine Palestinians, all Palestinians, as outside the realm of law, all of them as enemies, all of them as human animals, as Amalek. They imagine that they can kill and destroy with impunity because they have, since the creation of the Israeli state through the 1948 Nakba. It's worth tracing the origins of this impunity in 1948. That's the year of the UN Genocide Convention, the new crime in the international legal system that reemerged after World War II, a new crime that emerged in relation to the Nazi destruction of Jews, which only later would be called the Holocaust. Still, the seeds of the hierarchy we know since the 1990s as Holocaust and genocide studies were planted then because this hierarchy, that is the idea that the Holocaust is a unique genocide, essentially different than any other, this hierarchy served a crucial interest for the victors of World War II. It separated Nazi mass violence from the long history of Western colonial genocides and the shorter history of Soviet genocides that preceded the war. And more immediately, it also deflected attention from the large-scale war crimes of the Western Allies and the Soviets during World War II, including the dropping of atomic bombs on Japan by the United States. In the West, this hierarchy, Holocaust and genocide studies, rendered Jews the purest victims, a move enabled by the foundational place of Jews in the, quote, Judeo-Christian world. Uncompromised victimhood then morphed into superior morality and joined a core element of the Zionist project, which is conflating a people, Jews, with a state, Israel. Accordingly, it became unimaginable that Israel could perpetrate any crime under international law, let alone genocide. This is the origins of impunity for Israel in the international legal system. And this impunity has blurred the reproduction of exclusionary nationalism and settler colonialism in the Israeli state from its origins in the 1948 Nakba through the ongoing Nakba and decades of Israeli mass violence against Palestinians, culminating in Israeli genocide in Gaza. Thus, the new crime of genocide in the post-World War II international legal system necessitated Nakba denial, because Israel cannot perpetrate any crime in international law. So we had to have, from the beginning, Nakba denial and continuous Nakba denial, even as Israeli political and military leaders have called openly in the last 2 years for a second Nakba, a Gaza Nakba, another Nakba, and so on and so forth. They are telling us, admitting, that Israel's attack on Gaza is not a war. It is a Nakba. But advancing the absurd claim that the unprecedented destruction we all see in Gaza, the destruction that Israel's political and military leaders have declared openly as their goal from the very beginning, the destruction that Israelis continue to celebrate in unashamed ways online, on the streets, and on their news shows, that it is a war. This absurd claim is not the only mechanism of denial and rationalization of genocide. Weaponization of the Holocaust through the depiction of Palestinians as Nazis is another mechanism of this denial and rationalization. On 13th of January 2024, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a statement in response to the charge of genocide against Israel that South Africa brought in front of the International Court of Justice the previous month. And he said the following, Netanyahu. He said, in the murdered tunnels of Gaza, our forces have found copies of Hitler's Mein Kampf. In a home in Gaza, they found a child's tablet with a picture of Hitler as a screensaver. Netanyahu continued then to explain that not for nothing, the German Chancellor Scholz, after viewing the atrocities of the October 7 massacre, say Hamas are the new Nazis. In this way, situated between, quote, the murder tunnels of Gaza and Scholz's determination that Hamas are the new Nazis, is also a Palestinian child Nazi, in Netanyahu's words. The Israeli soldier Lopez understood well, no innocence in Gaza. The depiction of Palestinians as Nazis has a long history in Israel, stretching back to Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin comparing in 1982, in the context of Israel's attack on Lebanon, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat in Beirut to Adolf Hitler in his bunker in Berlin at the end of World War II. It is worth recalling that the massacre of a couple thousand of Palestinians and Lebanese in the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila in Beirut in 1982, perpetrated by the Falange militia but planned and overseen by the Israeli army, was recognized as an act of genocide by the United Nations General Assembly. 3 decades later, in October 2015, it was Netanyahu who took this weaponization to new levels when he asserted in a speech to the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem that the Palestinian Grand Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini planted the idea to murder Jews in Hitler's mind. You remember that? No? This was, of course, an unashamed fabrication without any basis whatsoever in historical reality, which functioned in a similar way to German Chancellor Scholz's description of Hamas as the new Nazis, to blur the historical reality of the very real Nazis in Germany, while creating a world turned upside down. Palestinians, under decades of Israeli settler colonial violence and military occupation, facing an ongoing Nakba, become the worst perpetrators in modern imagination, while Israel, the powerful state, a nuclear power, identified as powerless Jews, absurdity. Is this?
It's perfect. Keep on.
Yes? Okay.
Even better.
The corollary of casting Palestinians as Nazis is that any criticism of Israel's attack on Gaza can only be understood as support for Nazis. As Netanyahu remarked in response to the ICJ genocide case against Israel. And support for Nazis can only be rooted in anti-Semitism. This weaponization of the struggle against anti-Semitism, that is shifting it from the struggle to protect Jews to the struggle to protect Israel from any criticism of its policies and violence against Palestinians, this weaponization also has a long history, stretching back, quote, to the new anti-Semitism idea that the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, introduced back in the 1970s that identified anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. It took 2 decades, however, for this idea to shape Israeli state policies, in part in response to a move among scholars in the West at the time, increasingly more to use settler colonialism as a key term in discussions of Zionism in Israel. This is the 1990s. This move, built on decades of scholarship on Zionist and Israeli settler colonialism by Palestinian scholars, and it converged in the 1990s with significant growth in research by indigenous scholars on settler colonialism in the US, Canada, Australia, and other cases. The depiction of Israel as a settler colonial project threatens to undermine its founding national myth by exposing it as a structurally violent state from its inception, based on Zionism as a racist, Jewish supremacist ideology. It thus became urgent in the 90s to suppress criticism of Zionism in Israel, and conflating this criticism with anti-Semitism proved a particularly stigmatizing effect that would do the work. The tool for this project became the working definition of anti-Semitism. It was formulated primarily by American Jewish lawyer Kenneth Stern when he directed the anti-Semitism desk at the American Jewish Committee, and it was published in 2005 on the website of the European Union Monitoring Center on Racism and Xenophobia. The working definition was then used, cited, recommended, or adopted by various government and non-government organizations in North America and Europe, including the US State Department's Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism in 2010, and the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, in its meeting in Bucharest, Romania in 2016. The adoption of the working definition by IHRA marked a significant shift in the weaponization of the struggle against anti-Semitism. IHRA, very quickly established in 1998 as a major organization of global Holocaust memory, consisting of delegations from its 35 member states, including the United States and Israel, also Canada. Each delegation includes scholars, educators, and representatives of museums and memorials, but decision-making lies in the hands of the diplomats who head the delegations. Each year, one of the member states volunteers to hold the IHRA presidency and host the organization's meetings. Israel is the current holder of the IRA presidency from March 25 to February 2026, and Dani Dayan, the chairperson of Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust Memorial Institute, serves as the current IRA chair. Significantly, Dayan had served from 2007 to 2013 as the chairperson of the Yesha Council, the umbrella organization of Jewish settlers in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. In an interview in 2015, Dayan bragged that during his tenure as Yesha Council chairperson, the number of Jewish settlers in the Israeli-occupied West Bank grew by 35%, and that a Palestinian state, quote, today, 2015, is farther than ever. The Canadian government has adopted the IRA definition in 2019, so let's see what it adopted. This is the definition. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Clearly, this is not a definition at all. Rather, it functions, together with the examples attached to it, as an open-ended invitation for legislators, university administrators, government officials, and others to arbitrarily define anti-Semitism pursuant to their political objectives. Indeed, the IRA definition includes 11 examples that constitute an integral part of the document. The majority of the examples, 7 of the 11, deal with Israel and not with Jews. This heightened focus on Israel effectively conflates Jews with a foreign state, thereby accomplishing 2 primary goals of the Israeli government and its supporters, including Canada. First, it denies Palestinians the right to narrate their own histories and experiences, which is an expression of anti-Palestinian racism. And second, it excludes and attacks Jews who criticize Israeli policies and violence against Palestinians as, quote, bad Jews, which is an expression of actually very real anti-Semitism. Let's begin with anti-Palestinian racism. In response to an alarming rise of discrimination against Palestinians in North America, the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association, the ACLA, proposed in 2022 a definition of anti-Palestinian racism, a form of racism that silences, excludes, erases stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives. Anti-Palestinian racism may also include the following, and particularly important is defaming Palestinians and their allies with slanders such as being inherently anti-Semitic, a terrorist threat sympathizer, or opposed to democratic values. Let's see how anti-Palestinian racism functions in the IRA definition. So let's take, for instance, IRA definition example number 7 here, denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Now, extensive research by Palestinians, by Israeli Jews, by others, has shown that the Nakba stemmed from a settler colonial vision buttressed by a racist view of Palestinians that then became structural in Israel from its founding, right? There's a library of research on this. According to the IRA definition, however, any discussion of the Nakba is anti-Semitism because it exposes the racist nature of the establishment of Israel. The IRA definition thus serves as a tool of Nakba denial that defames Palestinians as inherently anti-Semitic for researching, writing, teaching, speaking about their own history and experiences. Notably, Israel openly announced its official policy of structural racism in its 2018 Jewish nation-state basic law, basic law. Importantly, Israel has no constitution, so basic laws function in effect as constitutional laws. Article 1C of the 2018 Jewish nation-state basic law states the following: the realization of the right to self-determination in the state of Israel is exclusive to the Jewish people. This is Israeli law. The law primarily excludes, of course, from self-determination Palestinians who comprise approximately 20% of Israel's citizens. That is in addition to the millions of Palestinians under Israeli military occupation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. This law then is an explicitly anti-democratic law that privileges Jewish identity and legitimizes anti-Palestinian racism by, quote, failing to acknowledge Palestinians as an indigenous people with a collective identity. IRA example number 7 also contradicts the text just before the list of example, which states that criticism of Israel, similar to that leveled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Now, by 2016, well-documented critiques of systematic racism have been leveled against other states, particularly settler colonial states, such as the United States and Canada. This self-contradiction in the IRA document reflects the idea of Israel's uniqueness. What we can say about numerous states around the world, we cannot say only about one state, Israel. It is thus absurd that the IRA definition example number 8, right after number 7, states that applying double standards by requiring of it Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, that this is also an example of anti-Semitism. And it's absurd because if the denial of the right to self-determination of Jews is anti-Semitic, it follows that the denial of the right to self-determination of any people is a form of racism. Yet according to the IRA definition, a critique of the 2018 Jewish nation-state basic law would be considered anti-Semitism, for it would address the structural racism of the Israeli state. The IRA definition then ends up being not a mechanism to prevent anti-Semitic double standards, but a double standard to advance anti-Palestinian racism. Ultimately, the IRA definition turns the struggle against anti-Semitism on its head. Instead of protecting a people, Jews, from exclusionary and violent states, it protects a foreign state, Israel, from criticism of its violence against the people, Palestinians. This political objective also has the perverse outcome of attacking Jews who criticize Israeli policies, those Jews whom Israel and its supporters consider, quote, bad Jews, especially anti-Zionist Jews. The conflation of Israel with all Jews that is integral to the IRA definition creates a double fallacy. It equates criticism of Israel or Zionism with anti-Semitism and Jewish identity with Zionism. Rebuking this faulty reasoning, 27 prominent Jewish studies scholars submitted in June 2025 an amicus brief in Harvard University's lawsuit against the Trump administration, and they explained how this false conflation violates Title VI of the US Civil Rights Act because it subjects Jews to harmful stereotypes about what constitutes Jewish identity. It imposes an identity on Jews. This conflation also ignores the fact that anti-Zionism has been, of course, an established Jewish identity since the emergence of Zionism in the late 19th century, as demonstrated in the rich history of anti-Zionist Jewish organizations and political parties. Predictably, such a centralization of Jewish identity has led to an unprecedented and ongoing targeting of anti-Zionist Jewish faculty members in colleges and universities across the US and elsewhere around the world, also here in Canada. Jewish students were also harmed in many cases, including when Northwestern University and the University of California, Los Angeles, forced the dismantling of Sukkot, that is the temporary outdoor religious structures set up by Jewish Voice for Peace in October 2024 to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Sukkot and express solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Now, attacking Jews as Jews and interfering by force in a Jewish religious celebration is clearly anti-Semitic. Tellingly, the IRA definition does not include this simple formulation, attacking Jews as Jews, in its pro-Israel conception of anti-Semitism. 5 more minutes. The IRA definition, in sum, is an absurdity, a dangerous absurdity, an absurdity meant to protect Israel from criticism of its policies and violence against Palestinians at all costs, even when Israel perpetrates genocide. And there is now a large and growing consensus about this that includes hundreds of genocide scholars around the world, including Israeli Jewish Holocaust scholars, all major human rights organizations, including the Israeli B'Tselem, numerous international law experts. The consensus also includes the independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territories in its report last month, the 3 reports since October 2023 by Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in the Occupied Palestinian Territories, and the vote by the International Association of Genocide Scholars, IAGS, this past August, where 86% of voting members accepted a resolution recognizing Israel's attack on Gaza as a case of genocide. And there is also international law that, despite itself, because the horror and destruction in Gaza are so clear, and because Israeli political and military leaders have declared their genocidal intent so explicitly, the International Court of Justice judges were left with no choice but to rule in January 2024 on provisional measures in the South Africa versus Israel genocide case, and recognize that Israel is plausibly violating the rights of the Palestinians for protection under the Genocide Convention. That is, that Israel is plausibly perpetrating genocide. The court then confirmed this decision, its provisional measures from January, in 2 subsequent provisional measure rulings in March and May 2024. Notably, in a separate declaration by Judge Abdul Qawi Ahmed Yusuf on 28th of March 2024, he stressed that, quote, all the indicators of genocidal activities are flashing red in Gaza. The meaning of plausible here is that we are in the realm of a clear risk of genocide, which activates the Genocide Convention and the international legal obligation of the state that signed and ratified it, including Canada. The key obligations are to prevent and punish genocide, that's Article 1 of the Convention, and not to be complicit in genocide, that's Article 3. Most states around the world, including Canada, have not acted according to their obligations in international law in relation to Israel's war of destruction in Gaza. Many, including Canada, continue to sell weapons, ammunition, and essential parts to Israel also after January 2024, and some, particularly in the West, again including Canada, continue to view criticism of Israeli violence against Palestinians as anti-Semitic, and continue to view criticism of Zionism as anti-Semitic, even as it is the political ideology that drives the genocide, as the perpetrators themselves are telling us. Remember Chemoz Kol, the Israeli officer, to occupy and settle. Some, including Canada, also seem to think that recognizing Palestinian statehood offers them a way not to comply with basic obligations in international law. The stakes are very high. Palestinians have been forced now to negotiate an end to the genocide against them, to negotiate with their perpetrators. This is also, of course, absurd. The so-called peace talks in Egypt this past Monday, which followed the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas that Israel has already violated, make no mention of international law, of accountability, of justice. Can there be peace with a genocide government? With a government whose prime minister is wanted on arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity? Can there be peace without coming to terms with the political structures and ideologies that resulted in the genocide? Of course not. We know this because our post-Holocaust world is a world of again and again, since there was a decision by the victors of the war not to come to terms with the political structures and ideologies that led to World War II, to the Nazis, and to the Holocaust. Chiefly the exclusionary nation-state system that emerged after World War I and that overlapped with the established white supremacy that stood at the heart of European empire-building colonialism and settler colonialism. Indeed, the Third Reich was a vision of a white supremacist empire based on extreme nationalism, purified of its racial others and enemies, with Aryan settlers tilling the land in its vast occupied regions in Eastern Europe, always ready to replace the pitchfork for the gun to fight for their superior civilization. Not only did the victors of the war not come to terms with this, they reproduced it, most clearly in the Israeli state project, a self-proclaimed exclusionary nation state and a self-proclaimed exclusionary settler state. What Zev Jabotinsky, the father of revisionist Zionism and the ideological compass of Netanyahu's Likud party, described explicitly in his well-known essay from 1923 as a settler colonial project that can only work with, quote, an iron wall. That's the title of the essay. There is a reason that Israeli President Herzog imagined Israel's genocide in Gaza in December 2023 as nothing less than a struggle to save Western civilization. This world of again and again, this Western civilization is also a world with over 123 million forcibly displaced people, including around 9 million Palestinians, among them survivors of the 1948 Nakba and their descendants. And in a world heating at a pace beyond what anyone could have imagined just a decade or two ago, we will likely face hundreds of millions of people on the move by mid-century. In this context, for Israel and its supporters, the Gaza genocide is a model. It is not only that Israeli soldiers and officers who have documented their own crimes in Gaza and uploaded them to social media are unashamed. They help spread the message of lawlessness. This is what awaits people who will dare to resist whatever measures imposed on them by extremely violent states in a world shaped by brute force. Gaza is in ruins. The West Bank under intense and escalating Israeli attacks. Israel's impunity persists. The losses are enormous. The destruction devastating, as the cliche goes, beyond words. Indeed, it is difficult, very difficult to imagine, let alone write about the future of Gaza, Palestine, not to mention accountability, justice, and peace. We have no choice, however, but to continue the struggle for a free Palestine, for everyone between the river and the sea, for a world beyond, below, around our world of again and again. On October 10th, after the words with which I opened my talk, Palestinian poet Hiba Abu Nada penned a poem in response to the terror she felt in those days of Israel's attack on Gaza. She titled it, "I Grant You Refuge." An Israeli airstrike killed her 10 days later. Professor of Arabic literature at UPenn, Huda Fakhreddin, translated the poem into English on November 3rd. And I conclude with Hiba Abu Nada's words from the last stanza of the poem. I grant you refuge from hurt and suffering. With words of sacred scripture, I shield the origins from the sting of phosphorus and the shades of cloud from the smog. I grant you refuge in knowing that the dust will clear, and they who fell in love and died together will one day laugh. Thank you.
If you want to take some questions, things online, thank you very much, Raz, for that. Anyone in the audience here? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for your talk. It was very illuminating. But I want you to know that, it has ebbed over time, but the majority of Jews, they are Zionists, right?
So the question, I'm just repeating the questions for the people online. The question is if the majority of Jews today are Zionists around the world. The answer is I don't know, and I'm not sure that we have clear figures on that. I also think that it's actually in flux and changing. I think there's also a generational split in that in many cases. But I think the point to make in response to the question is that, as I mentioned in the talk, since the emergence of Zionism, there was also the emergence of anti-Zionism. And anti-Zionism has been and continues to be, anti-Zionism has been and continues to be an established Jewish identity, right? A way for people to identify as Jews, since there is the national identity among Jews, the emergence of Zionism. There are also many Jews, by the way, who are not Zionists and who are not non-Zionists, who are non-Zionists, right? They're not anti-Zionists and they're not Zionists, right? And of course, there are actually also among, when we say Zionist, when we say anti-Zionist, that also includes all kinds of multiplicities of identities, right? So I don't know if the majority of Jews around the world today are Zionists, but I think that the important thing to keep in mind is that Jews express their identity as Jews in various ways around the world, and the Zionist project, the Israeli state project of conflating all Jews with the Israeli state and claiming to represent all Jews, right? That is a Zionist and an Israeli claim, right? Has proven to be actually incredibly dangerous, as I argued here, for Jews. It has also been disastrous for, of course, first and foremost, disastrous for Palestinians, right? But has also been incredibly dangerous for Jews.
I mentioned this because there has been like polls, of I think Jewish communities that showed, asking these questions. Because, I mean, you mentioned the term at one point, Jewish supremacy. And I think if people had stayed in the UK or even Canada, I think might be arrested or that or anti-Jewish hatred for saying that there would be Jewish supremacy or supremacists. But I'm thinking, I mean, even the majority of Jews are probably like Zionists. We say that the majority of Jews are supremacists, but
I can say another. So again, the question is about this use of the term Jewish supremacy, right, which defines the political project of the Israeli state. Again, I don't, I don't speak for all Jews, and I'm not, I don't think that I'm not familiar with with figures to answer that question, but we can definitely describe the Israeli state project because that's the way that Israeli Jews and the Zionists have described it themselves as a Jewish supremacist project, right? So it's in that sense a description of reality.
Would you mind, before we take your question, just take one of the online questions and then we go to you?
Context for that question, but it can also wait.
Good.
Okay, I just want to say, first of all, I'm a big fan of use from your work and my own academic work as a graduate student at ORA. But I believe part of the issue that complicates this is obviously by Zionist, Jewish Zionist constructions of who is Jewish and who is not Jewish. It obviously those who believe in the Zionist project in the state of Israel and all of these things, their supremacy are counted as Jewish. But then all of the generations of people who have existed beyond these institutions, a lot of these surveys, not all of them, but many of them are conducted by Jewish organizations that identify themselves as Zionists. So those who do not go to these community centers or these synagogues or follow these different online groups, whatever, will not be counted in those surveys. And also there are, especially among like younger generations like myself, there are a lot of people who I come from, my mother is online listening right now, so she's gonna hear this. I come from a family who denied their Jewishness. This is a generational issue of people who assimilated into quote unquote white Canadian society. Whereas younger generations of Jews are now saying, well, actually you can't just take that away from me just because my family, generations of my family were anti-Zionist and also not fully Jewish. They're also kind of white family members. And so that kind of separation of those distinctions is as Dr. Paul was saying, there's so many different moving parts that really complicate these issues. There are so many people who are not counted as Jews and also don't count racial understandings of Jewishness as it was when many of our ancestors immigrated to all over the place. And so there's many things that are complicated, but a lot of these things are going to be active representations of the Jewish Zionist community in the most part, but not necessarily the community as a whole, because there are probably millions of people who by either like white supremacist ideas or by whatever you want to say, could be counted as Jewish, because they have a Jewish heritage, even if they don't actually identify as Jewish or identify as Jewish in the sense of Zionist.
Thank you. There's a question from
Sure.
the online audience. What is a simple definition for Zionism? That's the question.
So the question is, what is a simple definition for Zionism?
Exactly.
I don't think,
I mean, not me.
yeah,
Today.
no, I don't think we should engage in trying to define Zionism here. We should think about what Zionism is in practice, right? Not what its definition is, right? There's a vast library of research on Zionism, which is very interesting, right? But then there came 1948 and the 1948 Nakba, and the Israeli state was created. And it was Ben Gurion, by the way, who was the first, so the Israeli first prime minister, the father of the Israeli state, right, considered, who was really the first post-Zionist, because he said we don't need Zionism anymore. There's a state. That's it. No more Zionism, right? So what Zionism, the history of Zionism before 1948, or what Zionism is, to try to define it, is all interesting, but I think irrelevant to what we're talking about, which is what Zionism became in practice when the Israeli state was created, and how today Zionism is understood in the Israeli state by Israeli Jews themselves. Again, think about someone like the Israeli officer Chemo, right? And his understanding of occupying and settling and what Palestinians are, right? The discourse about settler colonialism, right? Zionism, settler colonialism, and the Israeli state as a settler state is something that is an open discourse in Israeli Jewish society today. It's not hidden. There's no shame about it. Quite the contrary, right? So I don't think that we should not in this context, right? Think about what Zionism is, right? But think about what Zionism has actually become, and how people how the society that is perpetrating genocide today understands what Zionism is, right? And that's very clear because they're telling us explicitly, clearly, right? In various ways, again and again and again.
Question.
I guess I wanted to, I also really appreciated how you talked about the birth of kind of international law related to genocide and how that came out of, in some ways, our refusal to deal with the roots of, the European Jewish Holocaust. And so I guess I'm wondering, given that context, like, to what extent does the concept of genocide kind of still have utility in fight for Palestinian liberation? Like, is it kind of left being like beyond use, or to what extent is it still important and fighting for ongoing?
It's a good question. My good friend and colleague, Professor Dirk Moses, wrote a whole book on the concept of genocide. It's called Problems of Genocide, and I urge you to read it and to listen to how he's talked about it. He definitely argues that the concept of genocide has many problems, right? The problems of genocide. And chief among them is indeed that it has functioned to provide license for state violence because it's so easy, because genocide usually unfold in the context of war. It's always easy to say, well, we don't have genocidal intent, we're fighting a war. It's not war, it's not genocide, it's a war. And as I explained, the concept itself emerges in relation to what we now call the Holocaust, right? In a way to provide ultimate cover, right, for the new Israeli state in relation to the Holocaust, right? So it's important that we have the new crime in international law emerge really as a mechanism of Nakba denial, right? Also in relation to what we call today Holocaust memory, and to create the impunity for the Israeli state, of course, demonstrates this argument that genocide is perhaps broken beyond repair. But I'd like to argue otherwise, actually. Israel's genocide in Gaza is an accident of the system, right? It was never supposed to happen that there would be a charge of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. It was never supposed to happen that there would be arrest warrants against the Israeli head of state and his former defense minister of war crimes and crimes against humanity, primarily, actually, very significantly, the crime of using starvation as a method of warfare, right? It was never supposed to happen, right? Because impunity was very structural in the international legal system, using the crime of genocide specifically. But it has happened. As I said, there's a growing consensus. The International Association of Genocide Scholars has now recognized, very, very late, right? It took them a long time, right? It's contrary to how genocide prevention is supposed to work, right? But it happened. International legal experts, Holocaust scholars, Israeli Jews, the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. There's a very, very, and of course, millions of people around the world, right? And we have this consensus because the evidence is in our face, right? And it's in our face because Israelis indeed and imagine what they're doing as colonial warfare that is outside the realm of law. So everything is permitted. If we're fighting Nazis, if we're fighting Amalek, if we're fighting human animals, if this is a colonial war, right? Palestinians are not civilized, right? There is no law. And that's why they're saying what they're saying. That's how they imagine what they're doing. And that's why we have this accident of the system. And that's why the system of international law is in acute crisis today, right? Acute crisis. It's in ruins. But it's also an opportunity. Okay. Okay. It's also an opportunity, right? This acute crisis is also an opportunity to change international law. We badly need an international legal system in the world in which we live. Palestinians are not the only people discarded by the international legal system. I mentioned that we live in a world with 123 million, more than 123 million forcibly displaced people, right? Global warming, as I mentioned, you know, if the world of lawlessness that the US and Israel and their allies want to create by Israel's genocide, by their attack on the international legal system, by sanctions on the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, by attacks on the International Court of Justice, on judges, right? This lawless world will be terrible for everyone, right? For like 99% of the people in the world, right? We badly need an international legal system, right? This is an opportunity to change the international legal system. It might fail. It might fail. We're up against incredible power, right? But it might not fail, right? And for that, it's worth the struggle. And for that, actually, the fact that Israel's attack on Gaza is so clearly genocide, according to international law, and it was never supposed to be like this, right? Is an opportunity to change the international legal system, to place this as part of this struggle.
But do you think there has been for a long time a brainwashing of civil society in Israel with emphasis on its youth, so that current political opinion and morality is so far removed from those in regular Western population. That's the question.
Do you have it written there?
Absolutely.
Let's maybe,
Exactly. There
okay.
you go.
Do you think there has been for a long time a brainwashing of civil society in Israel with emphasis on its youth, so that current political opinion and morality is so far removed from those in regular Western populations? I'm just thinking about this last part of this question about being so far removed from regular. Oh, okay.
That second part.
Okay.
Brainwash.
The brainwashing.
Brainwashing of civil society. Is it brainwash, if I may interpret?
Yes.
Is it brainwashing, or is it a systematic or systemic part of the whole thing? These are two different things.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. I wouldn't use the word brainwashing. What I would say is that, first of all, I think there is so there are a number of things. Israel, from its inception, from the 1948 Nakba, has been, as I said, this conflation of a nation, of an exclusionary nation state of the Jewish people. It has a basic law, a constitutional law on that now, right? And it has been a settler state from the very beginning. Israel has never been a democracy, by the way, with all its claim for being the only democracy in the Middle East, because the 156,000 Palestinians who managed to remain within what became Israel after 1948 were immediately placed under military rule until 1966. And then we have the military occupation of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem in the 1967 war. So democracies don't hold millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and then millions of people without basic civil and political rights, right? Israel was never a democracy, right? So from the very beginning, Israel was a structurally racist settler state. Now, you know, the way that I want to answer this is to say that I'm not sure if that was if this is the background for the question, but there is a tendency today to say, okay, Israel's government today is the most far-right fascist government that Israel has ever had, right? And there are settlers in the government today in key positions, people who come from the religious Zionist movement, that is the post-1967 religious Zionist movement. And we have to remember that in the early 70s, these people were considered in Israeli Jewish society as crazy. These religious Zionists, right? These settlers. And today they're in government. Today they have, they really control kind of a very significant part of the officer corps in the Israeli army. And there's a tendency, therefore, to say this is a perversion of Zionism. This is not really what originally the Israeli state project was, right? There are today, and this is very interesting, a very interesting phenomena, Zionists who recognize the genocide, right? Not only without challenging Zionism, but actually by reaffirming their Zionist commitment, right? Even though, as I said, it's very strange. Every genocide has an ideology. What is the ideology of the Israeli genocide in Gaza? It's Zionism, right? But this is part of this. I'm not sure, again, if this was part of the background of the question, but the idea and this issue of brainwashing, I'm referring to this, right? that this is what we're seeing now is not really Zionism, right? The state has been taken over by fanatics, right? And of course, this is also usually comes with this argument that it's all because of Netanyahu, right? Netanyahu has been in and out of the office of the prime minister for the last 3 decades, right? But it's all about Netanyahu. It's all about these fanatics. It's all about the process that co-opted Zionism, right? And that simply does not fit the historical reality, right? If we understand, as I said, the historical reality that goes back to the 1948 Nakba, and actually, Alish Sabah, a Palestinian scholar, wrote a terrific book on Zionist settler colonialism before the 1948 Nakba, right? But if we understand the origins of Zionism and settler colonialism, the 1948 Nakba, the nature of the Israeli state, the ongoing Nakba, the decades of Israeli violence against Palestinians, nothing started in October 2023. The Gaza genocide, Israelis themselves are understanding it as a Nakba. They're telling us, right? So this is one way to answer that, right? It's rooted in Israeli society and history for a long time. But there's another thing to say, because things don't stay the same. There is change, right? And it's important that when we think about the perpetrators of the Gaza genocide, we're talking mostly of people in their 20s and 30s, right? Both people in the army and reservists, right? So we are talking about a generation that we can think about. A lot of them are actually kind of grew up in a post-Second Intifada Israel, which indeed there was more and more escalation. The racism became more and more overt. It became more and more acceptable to express it, right? It became more and more acceptable to celebrate violence against Palestinians, which didn't begin with the Gaza genocide, right? We have a lot of this already in past attacks on Gaza. Specifically, I'm thinking about Israel's attack on Gaza in 2014, right? Which was horrific. So there is also change, but I wouldn't say that and there's change also in the education system in that sense. There is change in the education system. It has also escalated, intensified the overt racism. So it's both. It's rooted in Israeli history and society, right? But there is also an escalation and an intensification. And we can talk more about, why that has actually happened, this intensification and escalation. But again, I wouldn't define it as brainwashing in that sense.
Well, what should be done to stop Israel's impunity?
How long we have?
What should be done to stop Israeli impunity?
We have to apologize. There's 220 people online, raising 20, so I have to back. Which is good, by the way.
Look,
the answer does not have to be scientific.
no,
Your thoughts from your experience, exact. That's what we need to do.
I think that, as I said towards the end of my talk, I think that it's clear that we are up against incredible power. We, that is, people who recognize reality in front of their eyes. I mean, it's incredible that a lot of this discussion, as I've said many times, is akin to standing outside in the middle of the day and someone comes up and says, it's the middle of the night, and you say, No, it's not. It's the middle of the day. And he says, well, if you say this the middle of the day, you're an anti-Semite, right? That's what I mean by recognizing reality, right? But we're up against incredible powers that are intent on denying reality, right? And in a way, I don't know what. I really don't know, right? It's when I say I don't know, what I mean is that this experience of the last 2 years, right? And who would have imagined that it would continue to unfold in this way for 2 horrific years, live streamed in this way, right? I mean, we've already had the origins of live streamed genocidal violence in Syria in 2011, specifically of perpetrators documenting their own atrocities. Mostly it was Facebook at the time that was used, but the way that we have it in Israel's attack on Gaza is unprecedented, right? And it's I think it's overwhelming for a lot of people, right? And there is a massive struggle around the world. The only thing that I can say is that this massive struggle needs to continue. And there isn't one thing that I think in that sense has to happen. And if we want to talk, if we want to talk practically, right, different people are comfortable doing different things in the struggle and being engaged in different ways with different groups in different communities. And it's easy to, again, to be overwhelmed and also to be very scared, again, depending on who you are. But there's a lot of things actually that people can do and have been doing for a long, long time, right? And the only thing that I can say is that it has to continue, right? People have to continue doing this. Now, one maybe, and this maybe relates to the question comment about Zionism that you asked. What's your name?
Terry.
Terry, that you asked, because we are also seeing that the Gaza genocide has left now the Jewish world broken. The Jewish world is broken. And as we've seen, the weaponization of the Holocaust, the weaponization of the struggle against anti-Semitism, is now actually putting Jews in danger. As you said, what's your name? Zoe. There's now a move to tag a lot of Jews as non-Jews, as bad Jews, right?
Example, like post, right?
Yes, but it's yeah, it's not just yeah, but there's many people have I think perhaps Mara Finkelstein's case in Muhlenberg College, a tenured Jewish anthropologist who was fired because of her speech. It's probably the most scandalous case, but there are many others actually. We know that Jewish faculty members without not on a tenure track and without tenure, particularly on adjunct positions, numerous in the hundreds probably have lost their teaching positions, right? But the Jewish world is in crisis, and in that sense, there's also particular significance of the kind of activism that we've seen in the Jewish world against the Gaza genocide. The kind of, and it doesn't all have to be even in the frame of anti-Zionism. It could be also a lot of non-Zionist Jews, right, who are against genocide, right? So I think that the particular activism in the Jewish world has significance as well. And finally, I'll say, in terms of the many things that people can do, we know that that the Israeli economy is in very bad shape. We don't know exactly how it's in very bad shape, right? We don't know exactly how many Israeli Jews have left in the last 2 years. We don't know exactly how many small businesses have collapsed in Israel in the last 2 years. We don't know how the ceasefire now might change this in various ways, right? But the Israeli economy is not in a good condition. Who knows? Maybe even this was one of the factors that pushed this ceasefire now, perhaps. But the significance of that is that we know that the activities to put pressure on the Israeli economy, BDS activities, right, have been very effective in the last 2 years, very successful and very significant, right? And that's certainly something, this sort of nonviolent activism that people can engage with. Read Francesca Albanese's last report on Israel's genocide on Gaza, on the economic support for Israel's genocide on Gaza, on the companies that drive the genocide, on the companies and the people who profit from the genocide. Read it to know, right, who you need to struggle against, right? Where not to buy, what not to buy, right? Because we do know that this has an effect. It has a major effect in the last 2 years. So that's another thing to think about in terms of what to do. But again, we're up against incredible power, and it all might fail. But as I said, it might also not fail, right? So the struggle is very, very worth it, especially if we consider what's at stake here.
Well, our local Starbucks just closed.
Yeah.
Big ones, large ones.
Not maybe just one, but.
I'd like to, sorry, but just because of time, I want to thank you so much for coming to our little town. And we're small in number, but big in heart, right?
Yes.
And I also want to say that Raz has a very active visit. Tomorrow he will be talking at the law school at the University of Toronto. On the following day he will be addressing my master. So we're really, really happy to and honored to meet someone who is not just committed with his action. I understand that you do have a job, but the denial of your post at University of Minnesota was as a big challenge, and that did not stop you from telling things the way